The headquarters of Helios Corporation rose like a tower of glass and steel in the heart of the city, its mirrored facade catching the sun and scattering light across the skyline. From the outside, it was a temple of modern capitalism, a monument to power and precision. Inside, however, where fluorescent lights hummed and polished shoes tapped across marble floors, another kind of drama unfolded. One less visible, but far more dangerous. Among the many leaders who walked those corridors, one figure stood apart: Alexander Grant. Senior department head, shareholder, strategist. He carried all these titles with the kind of quiet gravity that earned him both respect and fear. At 42, Alexander had carved his place in the company not by charm or manipulation but by results. His reputation was built on the discipline of numbers, the cold clarity of analysis, and a rare refusal to bend under pressure. Employees described him with the same mixture of admiration and intimidation they might use for a judge. Stern, decisive, incorruptible. It was this incorruptibility that made him indispensable. For years, Alexander had watched as executives rose and fell on the tide of alliances and scandals. He never played those games. His only loyalty was to the company's prosperity and to the employees who worked honestly for it. That was why, when whispers of favoritism and impropriety began to ripple through the hallways, Alexander felt the familiar weight of disgust knotting in his stomach. The rumor at first was vague, just idle talk over coffee or hushed laughter near the elevators. A secretary newly hired had caught the eye of the CEO. Nothing unusual in itself. Powerful men often surrounded themselves with youth and beauty. But as weeks passed, the whispers grew sharper. Her name was Vanessa Cole. She was strikingly attractive, all sleek dresses and knowing smiles, but even her best efforts could not mask her lack of experience. She misfiled reports, confused deadlines, and relied heavily on others to patch her mistakes. Yet despite this, doors that should have been closed to her swung open. Projects that seasoned managers begged for were handed to her without hesitation. Alexander noticed. Of course he noticed. Nothing in Helios escaped his eye for long. He watched as capable employees were sidelined, as Vanessa strutted through meetings with a confidence built not on skill but on the invisible shield of favoritism. He watched, and though he said nothing, his silence was not acceptance. It was calculation. That morning, as Alexander crossed the vast lobby of Helios, he saw Vanessa glide past in a crimson dress, the sharp clack of her heels echoing across the marble. A junior analyst trailed behind her, arms full of folders she had clearly refused to carry herself. She tossed her hair, laughed lightly at some comment on her phone, and disappeared into the CEO's private elevator. The analyst lingered, visibly irritated, before catching sight of Alexander. His eyes widened, as if he wanted to complain but lacked the courage. Alexander slowed, giving the young man the briefest nod, permission without words. The analyst hesitated, then swallowed his frustration and hurried away. Alexander's jaw tightened. He had seen it before, the corrosion of discipline, the rot of favoritism. But in Helios, a company where millions moved with the flick of a pen, this was not merely immoral, it was dangerous. By noon, Alexander sat in the executive dining room, a cavernous space lined with tall windows overlooking the city. Conversations around him buzzed with the usual hum of market fluctuations, client contracts, and quarterly forecasts. But scattered between the numbers were the murmurs of Vanessa's rise. A pair of managers at the next table whispered about her latest assignment, a contract negotiation worth millions, something she had no background to handle. She doesn't even know the difference between a fixed rate and a floating clause. One hissed. Doesn't matter, the other replied, rolling his eyes. She's untouchable. The word rang in Alexander's mind. Untouchable. He set his fork down, appetite gone. Untouchable was the most dangerous label anyone could wear in a corporation. It meant rules no longer applied. It meant mistakes would be hidden, costs covered, reputation sacrificed. And in the end, it meant destruction, not just for the guilty, but for everyone tied to them. That evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered alive outside the glass walls, Alexander remained at his desk. Spreadsheets glowed across his monitor, rows of numbers that should have been clean, exact. But he saw shadows creeping in, delays in reporting, unexplained reallocations of funds. Small, almost invisible, but unmistakably real. And at the center of every irregularity, a single name surfaced. Vanessa Cole. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. His eyes hardened as he looked out over the skyline. This was not merely an office affair. This was rot in the foundation, and rot, if ignored, always spread. In that moment, Alexander made a silent vow. He had tolerated politics, endured vanity, even outlasted corruption before. But this mixture of incompetence, arrogance, and favoritism was different. It was personal. It was an insult to every man and woman who had earned their place through merit. And Alexander Grant did not forgive insults. The war inside Helios Corporation had not yet begun, but he could already feel the tension rising like a storm behind the glass walls. Somewhere above him, in the CEO's office, Vanessa was laughing. Somewhere in the city, her shadowy lover was waiting. But here, in the heart of the company, Alexander sat in silence, planning, calculating, waiting for the moment to strike. Because when the time came, he would not merely challenge her. He would destroy her. Vanessa Cole did not simply enter Helios Corporation. She arrived, as if the building had been designed to showcase her presence. From the first day, she moved with a confidence that seemed out of place for someone so new, a confidence that was not born of knowledge but of calculation. She knew the effect she had on people, and she used it like a weapon sharpened to perfection. In the office gossip mill, there was always talk when a new hire appeared, but Vanessa was different. Her name spread across departments before she had even memorized the layout of the 22nd floor. Men noticed her instantly. Her fitted dresses, her deliberate smile, the faint perfume that lingered like a mark of possession. Women noticed too, not with admiration but with suspicion, as though they had seen her type before and knew the trouble she carried in her wake. It was not long before she became a fixture at the CEO's side. During boardroom meetings, she slipped into a chair next to him, laughing softly at jokes no one else dared to tell. She carried his files, whispered reminders into his ear, and somehow managed to turn even the simplest act, passing him a pen, adjusting her notes, into a display of intimacy. To the untrained eye, it looked like loyalty. To Alexander Grant, it looked like theater. He watched her from across the long mahogany table during one such meeting, her pen poised in manicured fingers, her lips curved in that ever-present smile. She leaned closer to the CEO, whispering something that made him chuckle under his breath. Around the table, executives shifted uncomfortably, some rolling their eyes, others pretending not to notice. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. She had no right to be there. When the meeting ended, Alexander lingered, gathering his papers slowly. Vanessa breezed past him, heels clicking, her perfume trailing behind. For a moment, her eyes flicked toward him, sharp, assessing, as though measuring whether he was a threat. Then she smiled, a smile too polished to be sincere, and vanished into the private elevator with the CEO. That was the first time Alexander felt the full weight of what she represented. Not just incompetence, not just vanity, but danger. The danger revealed itself in small cracks at first. Deadlines slipped. Contracts came back with errors. Clients grew impatient. Every time Vanessa had an excuse, another employee to blame, another department to fault. The CEO accepted her explanations without hesitation, while the true burden fell on others to repair. One night, Alexander stayed late, his office lights the only ones glowing against the darkened skyline. As he reviewed a set of documents, he noticed inconsistencies. Pages missing signatures, figures rounded incorrectly, clauses left blank. Sloppy work, the kind that should never have left a junior desk, let alone the office of the CEO's secretary. The next morning, he confronted a junior associate whose name appeared on the report. The young man, pale and nervous, swore he had completed everything correctly. She took the file, he admitted in a whisper, eyes darting toward Vanessa's desk, said she'd make the final edits. Then she turned it in like that. Alexander dismissed him with a nod, but his mind sharpened. Vanessa was not just incompetent. She was reckless, and recklessness, shielded by favoritism, could sink the company. By the third week, her influence was undeniable. She walked the halls like she owned them, issuing instructions to employees far above her station. Some obeyed out of fear, others because they knew resistance would be punished. She delegated work she did not understand, demanded reports in impossible timeframes, and treated those around her as if they were stepping stones on a path only she could see. One afternoon, Alexander overheard a heated exchange near the break room. Vanessa's voice, sharp and cutting, sliced through the low hum of conversation. "You're here to follow instructions," she snapped at a senior analyst. "Not to question where they come from." The analyst muttered something under his breath, but when Vanessa turned on her heel, her glare froze him into silence. The scene might have ended there, but Vanessa caught sight of Alexander standing a few steps away. For the briefest moment, her confidence faltered, her eyes narrowing as if she feared he had witnessed too much. Then, just as quickly, the mask returned. She smiled sweetly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, and glided away as if nothing had happened. Alexander remained still, his expression unreadable. Inside, though, his disgust hardened into resolve. Vanessa Cole was not merely a nuisance. She was a parasite feeding on the company's lifeblood, and parasites, left unchecked, multiplied. But Vanessa was not finished. That evening, as Alexander packed his briefcase, he passed the CEO's office and glimpsed them through the glass wall. The CEO leaning back in his chair, laughing, while Vanessa perched casually on the edge of his desk. She leaned forward, close enough to whisper, her hand brushing his sleeve in a gesture that was anything but professional. Alexander looked away, jaw clenched, and walked on without a word. He would not play the gossip. He would not spread rumors. But in his mind, the verdict was already clear. The company he had fought to protect, the reputation he had built brick by brick, was under threat. And the threat wore red dresses and smiled like a siren. Vanessa Cole thought herself untouchable. Alexander Grant knew better. He had seen women like her rise before, glittering like meteors across the sky, bright, dazzling, and doomed to burn out. The only question now was how much damage she would cause before she fell, and whether he would be the one to bring her down. It began with an email. The company-wide announcement arrived on a Monday morning, when employees were still shaking off the fog of the weekend. Subject line: New project lead appointment. The body was brief, almost perfunctory. Vanessa Cole would be taking charge of the Northbridge expansion proposal, a contract worth tens of millions, the kind of assignment seasoned executives had fought tooth and nail to secure. For a moment, the entire 22nd floor fell into stunned silence. Then the whispers began. Disbelief, anger, nervous laughter. A secretary? A woman with less than a month of service and no record of accomplishment? Alexander Grant read the announcement twice, his brow furrowed. Around him, employees exchanged glances, shaking their heads. Some muttered dark jokes under their breath. Others simply looked defeated. He closed his inbox and leaned back in his chair. The appointment was more than favoritism, it was lunacy. The Northbridge project was notoriously complex, involving international partners, labyrinthine legal structures, and razor-thin profit margins. One wrong move could sink months of preparation. To hand it to Vanessa was not just reckless. It was sabotage. That afternoon, the first project meeting was held in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. Vanessa swept in as though she had been born to lead, her crimson dress gleaming under the recessed lighting. She placed her handbag on the table, flipped open a notebook, and smiled at the circle of professionals who had spent decades earning their place at Helios. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice bright but brittle. "I'll be overseeing Northbridge moving forward. I expect your full cooperation." The room stiffened. Across the table, Alexander's gaze locked onto her, unblinking. He said nothing, waiting. She clicked her pen and launched into an outline that was more theater than strategy. Buzzwords spilled from her lips. Synergy, innovation, disruptive growth. But when pressed for details, she floundered. One manager asked about projected cash flow. She skimmed her notes, then deflected with a vague assurance. Another raised concerns about legal compliance. She smiled dismissively and promised to circle back. It was a disaster disguised as a presentation. And yet, at the end, the CEO himself appeared in the doorway, clapping lightly as though she had delivered a masterpiece. "Excellent initiative, Vanessa," he declared. "I'm confident you'll lead this with brilliance." The meeting dissolved into reluctant applause. Vanessa glowed, basking in approval she had not earned. But Alexander did not clap. His hands remained flat on the table, his expression carved in stone. Later that week, he began to see the consequences. Vanessa scheduled meetings without informing key stakeholders. She misfiled critical documents, delaying signatures by days. She ignored emails from legal, then berated subordinates when problems surfaced. When mistakes piled up, she shifted blame with ruthless ease, pointing fingers at junior staff who lacked the authority to defend themselves. One evening, a senior analyst knocked on Alexander's door, eyes weary. "Sir," he began hesitantly, "if this continues, we're going to lose Northbridge. She doesn't understand the contracts, and the CEO. He won't listen to anyone else." Alexander dismissed him gently, but the words lingered. He won't listen. That was the heart of the problem. It wasn't just Vanessa's incompetence. It was the shield of protection that made her untouchable. Days stretched into weeks, and resentment festered. The office, once humming with energy, became a place of quiet bitterness. Employees walked on eggshells, terrified of attracting Vanessa's ire. She strutted through the halls with a predator's grace, issuing commands she barely understood, smiling like a queen in a court of unwilling subjects. And then came the slip. At a critical meeting with Northbridge partners, Vanessa presented a revised budget projection riddled with errors. Numbers that should have aligned perfectly contradicted each other. Clauses were omitted, deadlines miscalculated. The clients exchanged sharp glances, their patience visibly thinning. Alexander sat at the far end of the table, watching. Every instinct in him screamed to intervene, to salvage the disaster before it poisoned the deal. But he remained silent, hands folded, eyes cold. This was not his mess to clean. Not yet. Afterward, in the corridor, he overheard Vanessa on the phone. Her voice was low, urgent, tinged with frustration. "I told you, Damien, it's under control. He believes everything I say. Just trust me." Damien. The name struck like a blade. Alexander paused, his steps slowing. He did not know who Damien was, but the tone, the intimacy was unmistakable. Whoever he was not part of Helios, which meant Vanessa's entanglements stretched beyond the CEO's office. That night, Alexander sat in his office long after the building had emptied, city lights casting reflections across his glass desk. He replayed the events of the past weeks. The sudden appointment, the incompetence, the favoritism, the whispered name. The puzzle pieces slid into place, forming a picture of corruption that was no longer speculation. It was certainty. He closed his laptop with a decisive snap. Vanessa Cole was not rising. She was climbing a rope spun from lies, deceit, and manipulation. And ropes like that always snapped. The only question was how much of Helios she would drag down with her when it broke. Authority in the wrong hands always mutates into cruelty. Within weeks of her sudden appointment, Vanessa Cole's presence transformed from an annoyance into an infection spreading through every corridor of Helios Corporation. What began as whispers and eye rolls soon hardened into resentment. Then fear. Employees no longer laughed at her incompetence behind closed doors. They braced themselves against it, as one braces against a storm. She had discovered her new favorite game. Command. In the open-plan offices, her voice carried like a whip, sharp and humiliating. She demanded reports within impossible timeframes, tossing folders onto desks with careless flicks of her manicured fingers. If someone faltered under the weight of her orders, she made an example of them. Is it really that difficult? She snapped one morning at a junior analyst who had stayed until midnight to finish her figures. If you can't handle basic math, perhaps you're in the wrong company. The young man flushed red, his hands trembling as colleagues avoided his gaze. Vanessa smiled, satisfied, and strode away on heels that clicked like the march of a drill sergeant. What stung most was not her cruelty, it was her hypocrisy. She demanded perfection from others while delivering chaos herself. Contracts she misread became the responsibility of someone else. Emails she ignored turned into urgent crises for entire teams. And every mistake, every delay, every mess she created was brushed off with the same poisonous phrase, "Handle it." The employees of Helios were not fools. They saw through her, and anger grew in silence. But Vanessa, shielded by the CEO's indulgence, seemed untouchable. Alexander Grant watched this unfold with a mixture of contempt and calculation. Each morning, he arrived to find fresh complaints stacked on his desk. Informal reports from managers, whispered grievances from staff too fearful to speak openly. He listened, he noted, but he gave no false promises. "Do your jobs," he told them quietly. "Do them well. Leave the rest to me." They obeyed, because Alexander's words carried weight. Unlike Vanessa's shrill commands, his voice was iron, steady, measured, undeniable. In private, employees whispered that he was the last line of defense, the only one strong enough to stand against her. Vanessa, meanwhile, seemed to revel in her newfound infamy. She strutted through the hallways like a monarch, her perfume heavy in the air, her heels clicking in time with the beat of her self-importance. She called senior staff into her office, people who had been at Helios long before her, and reduced them to errand boys and girls. One afternoon, Alexander passed by her glass-walled office and saw her lounging in her chair, scrolling through her phone while two assistants scurried to arrange her paperwork. She didn't even glance at them. It was not just arrogance. It was contempt. The breaking point for many came during a Friday meeting. Vanessa convened the Northbridge team to review progress. What followed was not a review but a performance of domination. She berated a project manager for a minor typo, sneered at a financial analyst for overcomplicating numbers, and openly mocked a legal advisor for raising compliance concerns. "You people are here to execute," she said coldly. "Not to question me. If you can't understand that, I'll find someone who does." The room fell silent. At the far end of the table, Alexander's expression did not change. But inside, he felt the weight of every employee's eyes turning toward him, silently pleading. They could not speak against her. The CEO's shadow loomed too large. But Alexander was different. He had power both in title and in shares. Vanessa must have sensed it too, because when the meeting adjourned, she lingered near the doorway, her gaze locking onto him. For the first time, her smile faltered. She seemed to search his face, as though trying to decipher whether he was an ally or an enemy. Alexander gave her nothing. No smile, no frown, no acknowledgement. Only silence. And that silence unsettled her more than any open challenge could have. That evening, as the building emptied and the hum of the city filled the glass tower, Alexander remained in his office. He reviewed the week's disasters, mismanaged deadlines, hostile work environment, financial errors buried beneath false reports. Piece by piece, he assembled the mosaic of Vanessa's reign. He knew what she did not. Arrogance always plants the seeds of its own destruction. She believed herself invincible because the CEO adored her. But Alexander had seen empires crumble before. He knew better than anyone that protection built on desire was protection built on sand. Somewhere in the city, Damian Ross was likely waiting for her, feeding her ambition, urging her to squeeze more out of Helios. Alexander did not yet know the details, but he could sense it, the faint stench of conspiracy lingering in the air. He closed his laptop, the click echoing in the quiet room. The storm Vanessa had unleashed was growing, and it would not spare her forever. The employee's patience was thinning, the company's foundation cracking. And Alexander, sitting in the shadows of his office, sharpened his resolve like a blade. When the moment came, he would not simply oppose her. He would dismantle her, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the truth. The city at night had a different pulse than the polished daylight hours of Helios Corporation. Beneath the gleaming towers and neon lights, bars and lounges thrummed with a quieter, more dangerous rhythm. It was in one of these places, a velvet-lined den of smoke and whiskey, that Vanessa Cole shed her secretary's skin and revealed the life she kept hidden from her colleagues. Damian Ross was waiting for her. He leaned casually against the bar, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a leather jacket draped across broad shoulders. His smile was as sharp as a blade, the kind that could cut without leaving a mark. When Vanessa arrived, crimson dress shimmering under the low light, his eyes lit with satisfaction. "You're late," he murmured, pulling her close without care for the stares they drew. "I had to stay after," she whispered, sliding onto the bar stool beside him. "Grant's watching me too closely. He sees everything." Damian chuckled, low and amused. "Let him watch. You're untouchable. Remember? The old man upstairs is blind with desire. Use it. Drain it. We're not here to play safe." Vanessa's smile flickered, uncertain, but only for a moment. She sipped her drink, leaned into Damian's shoulder, and let his words harden her resolve. She wasn't here for safety. She was here for power. What she didn't know was that fate had already begun to tighten its noose. Back at Helios, whispers were spreading like wildfire. Employees who once suffered in silence now shared stories in hushed tones. Of Vanessa berating managers, of files gone missing, of contracts mismanaged. And threaded through these stories was a new rumor, one darker than favoritism. That Vanessa was not loyal even to the man who shielded her. Alexander Grant heard the whispers and tucked them away like pieces of a puzzle. He had not yet seen Damian with his own eyes, but the name had reached him, once in the heated phone call he'd overheard, and again in a muttered slip from a junior assistant who claimed Vanessa had sent company money to someone outside. Money leaving Helios. That was more than incompetence. That was theft. On Thursday evening, Alexander left the office later than usual. As he descended into the underground parking garage, voices echoed faintly across the concrete. He slowed his stride, the sound drawing him toward the far corner. There, partially hidden in shadow, stood Vanessa. She wasn't alone. Damian Ross towered beside her, hand on her waist, his laugh low and confident. Vanessa's face glowed with an expression Alexander had never seen in the office. Raw affection, reckless and unguarded. In her hand was a small envelope, thick enough to bulge. She pressed it into Damian's palm. He pocketed it with a grin, then kissed her with a hunger that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Alexander remained still in the shadows, watching. His jaw tightened, his mind sharpening. Here was the confirmation he needed. It wasn't just favoritism. It wasn't just arrogance. It was betrayal of the company, of its employees, of the very fabric of trust Helios had been built upon. When Damian and Vanessa finally disappeared into the night, Alexander stepped from the shadows, his breath slow and controlled. He had seen enough. The puzzle was no longer abstract. It was complete, and the picture it revealed was wrought, deep and festering. The next day, Vanessa strutted into the office as though nothing had happened, her heels clicking against the polished marble, her smile radiant. She barked orders, humiliated subordinates, and basked in the CEO's unshakable affection. But beneath the gloss of her performance, Alexander could see the cracks. She was distracted. She checked her phone too often, eyes darting to the screen with nervous energy. She stepped out for calls that lasted too long, returning with a glow too warm to be explained by business. And in her emails, Alexander noticed, as his analysts quietly forwarded him copies, small inconsistencies began to appear. Approvals sent without signatures. Funds shifted into odd accounts. Always subtle. Always just enough to pass unnoticed by the careless. But Alexander was not careless. That evening, in his office, he spread the evidence before him. Emails, reports, witness accounts, a photograph, blurry but undeniable, of Vanessa with Damien at the bar. Piece by piece, he assembled the case. Not for gossip, not for rumor, for truth. Yet truth alone was not enough. In Helios, truth was a weapon, and weapons had to be timed. If he struck too soon, the CEO would shield her, dismiss it all as jealousy or politics. If he struck too late, the company could bleed millions, and employees would pay the price. He leaned back, hands steepled beneath his chin, and closed his eyes. Patience, he reminded himself. Patience is power. Somewhere in the city, Vanessa laughed against Damien's shoulder, believing herself untouchable. Somewhere in the tower, the CEO dreamed he controlled his empire. But Alexander Grant knew better. He knew that rot, once exposed, spread too fast to hide. And when the storm broke, he intended to be the one holding the lightning. Every empire falls not from a single blow but from a series of cracks that can no longer be ignored. For Helios Corporation, the crack widened on a Monday morning, when the Northbridge partners arrived expecting clarity and instead found chaos. The conference room was a battlefield of nerves. Executives lined the polished table, their folders neatly stacked, their expressions tense. At the head sat Vanessa Cole, radiant in a sapphire blue dress, her smile dazzling as if charm could replace competence. She tapped her pen against the table, rehearsed confidence dripping from every movement. "Good morning," she began brightly, flipping through a slide deck. "Today, I'll walk you through our revised proposal. We're confident you'll find these numbers both aggressive and achievable." The lights dimmed, the projector flickered, and the first slide appeared. At once, Alexander Grant felt his stomach twist. The figures were wrong, sloppily rounded, columns misaligned. It wasn't just a typo, it was negligence. As Vanessa clicked through the slides, the errors multiplied. Contractual obligations listed under the wrong jurisdictions. Deadlines that contradicted earlier agreements. Financial projections that ignored currency fluctuations. It was a patchwork of buzzwords and fabricated optimism, stitched together without the faintest understanding of the details. Across the table, the Northbridge representatives shifted uncomfortably. One leaned toward his colleague, whispering, while another's pen tapped irritably against the notepad. When questions came, they cut like knives. "Why does your model exclude the fixed-rate adjustment clause?" Vanessa blinked, her smile faltering. "That's a minor oversight. We'll circle back on that. And these timelines, are you aware that your proposed deadline conflicts with our government-mandated review period?" Again she floundered. "Well, the team will adjust as necessary." The questions piled higher, sharper. Vanessa drowned beneath them, each answer thinner than the last. At the far end of the table, Alexander remained silent, his face carved from stone. Every instinct in him screamed to intervene, to salvage the wreckage before it consumed months of work. But he did not move. Not yet. To rescue her now would be to shield her. And Alexander Grant did not shield parasites. When the meeting finally collapsed, the Northbridge delegation departed with cold politeness, their doubts heavy in the air. Vanessa lingered in the conference room, her smile long gone, her hands trembling as she gathered her papers. For the first time, the mask slipped. She looked not like a queen, but like a child who had wandered too far into a game she didn't understand. But she did not take responsibility. Instead, she found a scapegoat. That afternoon, she stormed into the analyst's bullpen, eyes blazing. "Who prepared these numbers?" she demanded, slamming the report onto a desk. "This is amateur work. Do you realize the embarrassment you've caused?" The young analyst she cornered stammered in shock. "But those figures were accurate," I double-checked. "Then you're incompetent," Vanessa snapped. "If you can't meet expectations, perhaps this isn't the company for you." The office froze. Dozens of employees watched as she humiliated a colleague in public, her words venomous, her tone merciless. The analyst's face burned red, his hands shaking. From the glass balcony above, Alexander watched. His chest tightened, not with anger. Anger was fleeting, but with the cold certainty that she had crossed a line. This was no longer arrogance. This was cruelty born of fear, and fear made her dangerous. That evening, Alexander convened a private meeting with his trusted managers. In a small, windowless room far from Vanessa's reach, they laid out the truth. Missed deadlines, contractual errors, hostile behavior. One by one, voices rose in frustration. She's driving morale into the ground. Clients don't trust her. We're bleeding credibility. If this continues, Northbridge will walk. Alexander listened in silence, his hands steepled beneath his chin. When the room quieted, he spoke. "I know," he said evenly, "and I assure you, this will not last." It was not a promise of hope. It was a declaration of war. The next day, the CEO called an emergency review of the Northbridge fiasco. Vanessa sat at his side, head high, lips curled in feigned confidence. She blamed analysts for poor preparation, legal for overcomplicating, even logistics for mismanaging timelines. The CEO nodded along, defensive, unwilling to admit his golden protege had failed. But Alexander saw the shift. The board members around the table did not nod. They did not smile. They exchanged wary glances, their silence heavier than words. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Vanessa herself had watered it. After the meeting, as Vanessa swept past, she cast Alexander a look sharp enough to cut glass. She knew he hadn't spoken up, hadn't defended her, hadn't offered even a lifeline, and in her eyes he saw it, the flicker of fear. For the first time, Vanessa Cole realized she was not untouchable. That night, Damian Ross pressed a glass of whiskey into her hand, his grin infuriatingly calm. "So you stumbled. Big deal. The old man will cover for you again." "He won't if Grant keeps circling me," Vanessa snapped, pacing the apartment. "He's waiting for me to fall." Damian smirked. "Then don't fall. Climb higher. Take more. The higher you go, the harder it'll be for anyone to drag you down." Vanessa stared out the window, the city lights flickering like stars. She believed Damian. She had to. But deep inside, the seed of fear Alexander had planted grew roots. And Alexander, alone in his office, sharpened his patience. He had seen empires crack before. This was only the beginning. Failure should have been the end of Vanessa Cole. By every rule of corporate life, her blunder at the Northbridge presentation was enough to ruin her credibility forever. Any other employee would have been demoted, reassigned, or quietly dismissed. But Vanessa was not any other employee. She was the CEO's chosen, and the rules bent around her like glass under heat. The morning after the debacle, Helios's upper floors buzzed with rumors. Executives spoke in clipped tones. Managers traded wary looks, and employees whispered as Vanessa strutted through the lobby in another immaculate dress, head held high. To their disbelief, she wasn't hiding. She was glowing. By noon, the CEO called a press briefing to clarify the Northbridge setback. In his steady baritone, he declared it a temporary misalignment of strategy, no fault of leadership, merely growing pains of rapid expansion. He praised Vanessa for her initiative and dedication, framing her as a rising star unfairly maligned by competitors. In the audience, Alexander Grant listened with cold fury. It wasn't just the lies, it was the shamelessness of it. To twist failure into triumph, incompetence into vision, was to insult every hard-working employee who had carried Helios on their backs. When the briefing ended, Vanessa stood at the CEO's side, smiling sweetly for the cameras, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture too intimate to be professional. The message was clear. She was untouchable. Behind closed doors, however, Vanessa was anything but calm. That evening, in the dim glow of a rooftop bar, she clutched a glass of champagne while Damian Ross leaned lazily across from her, his grin sharp as a wolf's. "You almost blew it," he said, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Another 5 minutes and those Northbridge guys would have torn you apart." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Don't remind me." "Hey," he murmured, leaning closer. "It doesn't matter. The old man cleaned it up, didn't he? He'll always clean it up. You just have to keep him hooked." She exhaled shakily, staring at the bubbles rising in her glass. Grant's watching me. He knows I screwed up. He's waiting for me to slip again. Damien chuckled, swirling his whiskey. Then don't slip. Push harder. Make yourself so essential that even Grant can't touch you. The CEO's blind with desire. Use it. Milk it. And while you're at it, don't forget us. He tapped his jacket pocket, where envelopes of cash often disappeared. Vanessa hesitated, torn between fear and greed. But Damien's voice was a drug she couldn't resist. Slowly, she nodded. At Helios, the fallout deepened. Employees, already bruised by Vanessa's arrogance, now saw the CEO's cover-up as betrayal. Their frustrations spilled in whispers. She's incompetent, and they're protecting her. If this keeps up, clients will walk. Why even try? If failure gets rewarded, morale cratered, productivity slipped. Behind every desk, resentment festered like an open wound. Alexander felt it daily. Managers confided in him. Analysts poured out frustrations. Employees vented their despair. They didn't just want sympathy, they wanted justice. And Alexander, with his calm authority, became their unspoken champion. One evening, a trusted colleague cornered him in the hallway. You're the only one who can stop this. The CEO won't listen to us. He won't listen to anyone. But you have shares. You have power. Alexander's eyes hardened. Power is only useful if you know when to use it. Not yet. The colleague looked crestfallen, but Alexander wasn't stalling out of fear. He was waiting, calculating, preparing. Vanessa was digging her own grave. He would simply ensure that when she fell, there would be no chance of recovery. Vanessa, oblivious to the gathering storm, grew bolder. With the CEO shielding her, she wielded her authority like a cudgel. She overrode senior managers, rewrote schedules without consultation, and demanded weekend work from teams already stretched thin. When employees pushed back, she mocked them openly. If you can't keep up, she sneered at one meeting, perhaps Helios is too much for you. Maybe you belong in a smaller firm. The words stung like acid. Pride cracked. Loyalty waned. Yet no one dared challenge her. Not with the CEO watching her like a prized possession. Except Alexander. He didn't argue with her in public. He didn't shout or curse. He simply watched. Observed her arrogance, her cruelty, her mounting mistakes. His silence was deliberate, heavy, unshakable. And Vanessa, for all her bravado, felt it like a blade hovering just above her neck. One afternoon, she passed him in the hallway. For a moment their eyes met. She smiled, too wide, too bright, but her gaze flickered with unease. Alexander's expression gave nothing away, yet she felt it, the promise of reckoning. That night, alone in his office, Alexander reviewed the growing pile of evidence. Mismanaged funds, client complaints, employee testimonies. Each piece was a stone, and together they formed the foundation of the case he would one day unleash. He thought of the CEO blind and foolish, a man who mistook desire for judgment. He thought of Damien Ross, lurking in the shadows, feeding Vanessa's ambition while draining the company's lifeblood. And he thought of Vanessa herself, smiling, strutting, believing herself untouchable. He closed the folder with a decisive snap. Patience had its limits. The storm was coming, and when it broke, no shield of desire would save her. The tension at Helios had become a living thing, thick, oppressive, breathing down the necks of every employee who walked its glass corridors. Projects slowed. Meetings ended in silence. Managers carried their exhaustion like visible scars. The company still looked pristine from the outside, but inside, rot was spreading. And at the center of it all was Vanessa Cole. Her reign grew harsher with every day, her arrogance inflated by the CEO's blind devotion. She barked orders at senior staff, dismissed concerns with a wave of her manicured hand, and demanded impossible timelines as though the company were her personal kingdom. But her most dangerous quality wasn't her incompetence. It was her belief that no one could stop her. Alexander Grant had watched long enough. On a Wednesday morning, he requested a private meeting with the CEO. The secretary tried to delay him, but Alexander's authority as a shareholder gave weight to his demand. Within an hour, he was standing in the corner office, a palace of glass and leather overlooking the city. The CEO rose from behind his desk, smiling warmly. "Alexander, my most trusted strategist. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Alexander didn't smile. He placed a folder on the desk between them. "We need to talk about Vanessa Cole." The smile faltered. "What about her?" "She is damaging the company," Alexander said evenly. "Northbridge nearly collapsed under her incompetence. Employee morale is in freefall. Errors, missed deadlines, hostile management. Her behavior is unsustainable. And the cover-ups are worse. You're protecting her at the cost of the company's future." For a moment, silence hung heavy. The CEO's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening. "Vanessa is young. She's learning. Every rising star stumbles. You stumbled once, if you recall." "I stumbled," Alexander replied, his voice cold. "But I learned." "She doesn't learn. She deflects, she blames, she destroys. And you," his eyes narrowed, "you enable it." The CEO slammed his palm on the desk. "Enough. You think I don't see what you're doing? This isn't about Vanessa. This is about you. You resent her rise, resent her place at my side. Admit it, Alexander. You don't like her because you can't control her." Alexander leaned forward, his voice low but sharp as glass. "This isn't about control. This is about survival. You are gambling the company's reputation on someone who doesn't deserve to be here. And when she falls, and she will fall, you'll drag all of us down with her." Their eyes locked, a battle of willpower in the silence of the office. For the first time in years, Alexander saw the CEO not as a leader, but as a man blinded by desire. The CEO's voice dropped to a growl. "You're out of line." "No," Alexander replied. "I'm the only one still in line." Word of the confrontation spread quickly. By the end of the day, whispers snaked through the hallways. Grant had stood up to the CEO. He had named the truth aloud. Employees, worn thin by Vanessa's tyranny, felt a flicker of hope. Vanessa, however, was rattled. When she heard of the meeting, her composure cracked. She stormed into the CEO's office, furious. "He's undermining me," she hissed, pacing like a caged predator. "He wants me gone." The CEO wrapped an arm around her shoulders, murmuring soothingly, "Let me worry about Alexander. You just focus on proving yourself." But Vanessa's eyes flickered with fear. Alexander's silence had always unnerved her, but now it had transformed into open defiance. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her stilettos. That evening, Damian Ross poured her another glass of wine, smirking as she vented her frustration. He confronted him, Damian, right to his face. "He's not afraid." Damian chuckled. "Of course he's not. Men like Grant live for battles like this. But don't worry, he's only one man. You've got the old man wrapped around your finger. Use it. Push harder." Vanessa hesitated, staring into her glass. "What if Grant convinces the board?" "Then convince the board first," Damian said smoothly. "Throw dirt on him. Undermine him. Make it look like he's the one destabilizing the company. Trust me. Perception is everything." Vanessa nodded slowly, but the fear didn't leave her eyes. She knew Alexander Grant was no ordinary opponent. He didn't waste words. He didn't bluff. If he had declared war, it was because he already believed he could win. Meanwhile, Alexander returned to his office long after the building had emptied. He sat in the dark, the city skyline glowing beyond the glass. On his desk lay the folder he had shown the CEO. Reports of Vanessa's failures, testimonies from employees, documented losses. He added another sheet to the pile, an unsigned approval that had redirected funds into a suspicious account. Damian Ross's name was written in the corner, faint but undeniable. Alexander steepled his fingers and exhaled slowly. The confrontation had accomplished one thing. The lines were now drawn. There was no going back. Vanessa would escalate. The CEO would shield her, and the company would teeter on the edge. But Alexander Grant was ready. He wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. He was building a case strong enough to bring down both Vanessa and anyone who stood behind her. Because this was no longer about corporate politics. This was about survival. And Alexander did not lose wars. For weeks, Vanessa Cole had ruled Helios with a poisoned smile and sharpened heels. But now her empire was cracking. The confrontation between Alexander Grant and the CEO had spread through the halls like electricity, igniting whispers and sparking hope. Employees who once kept their heads down now lifted their eyes, sensing the first glimmer of rebellion. Alexander became their anchor. It began in whispers, conversations in break rooms, hurried exchanges in elevators, late-night emails sent from personal accounts, managers, analysts, assistants. One by one, they came to him, carrying stories of Vanessa's cruelty and incompetence. They spoke of deadlines impossible to meet, contracts deliberately mishandled, funds siphoned to accounts no one could trace. She humiliated me in front of my entire team. One manager confessed, voice shaking. She threatened to fire me if I didn't sign off on errors. Another said, hands clenched in fists. She's draining us, a young analyst whispered. Every day feels like a war zone. Alexander listened to them all. He did not offer false comfort. He offered something stronger, resolve. Document everything, he told them. Every insult, every order, every mistake. If she wants to bury us in lies, we will bury her in truth. In a quiet conference room far from Vanessa's gaze, Alexander assembled his core allies. Around the table sat senior managers, trusted analysts, and department heads who had endured her tyranny in silence for too long. The air was heavy with tension, but Alexander's presence steadied them. She thinks she's untouchable. He began, voice calm, eyes sharp. She believes the CEO's protection is enough to shield her from consequence. But protection built on desire is fragile. We don't need rumors. We don't need opinions. We need facts, hard evidence. And when we present it, not even the board can ignore it. He spread documents across the table. Spreadsheets riddled with errors, emails filled with evasions, proof of funds redirected without authorization. One by one, his allies leaned forward, their disbelief giving way to grim recognition. This is fraud, one muttered. This could sink us, another whispered. Alexander nodded. And she won't stop. She'll push harder. She'll make bigger mistakes. Let her. Every step she takes digs her grave deeper. Our job is to make sure the board sees the hole she's digging. Meanwhile, Vanessa sensed the shift. She walked the halls with the same strut, the same dazzling smile, but beneath the surface she felt the weight of eyes on her. Employees no longer bowed their heads so quickly. Their silence was no longer fear, it was defiance. She barked orders, but hesitation lingered before obedience. The air had changed, and she hated it. That evening, she stormed into the CEO's office. They're turning against me, she snapped. Grant's behind it. He's poisoning them. The CEO, exhausted from weeks of defending her, rubbed his temples. Alexander is a shareholder. His influence is strong. But don't worry, I'll handle him. You just keep your focus. Vanessa's eyes flashed. If he keeps pushing, you'll lose me. It was a threat dressed as vulnerability, and the CEO, blinded still, softened instantly. No one will take you from me, I promise. But Vanessa knew promises were only words. Alexander Grant was no longer in the shadows. He was moving quietly, deliberately, and she could feel the walls closing in. That same night, in a bar across town, Damian Ross leaned back in his chair, smirking as Vanessa vented her fury. He's building an army, she hissed. They look at him like he's their savior. Damian poured her another drink. Then break the savior. Spread rumors. Make him look corrupt. If you can't outshine him, smear him. Vanessa hesitated, but Damian's grin widened. You wanted power, didn't you? This is how you keep it. Don't play defense, attack. Her jaw tightened. She would not be destroyed. If Grant wanted war, she would give it to him. At Helios, the storm gathered strength. Alexander's allies compiled evidence, cross-referenced reports, and quietly funneled everything into a growing dossier. They were no longer a collection of frustrated employees. They were a movement. One night, as the city glowed beyond the glass windows, Alexander stood before them. His hands rested on the thick folder of evidence, his voice steady and sure. "This is bigger than Vanessa," he said. "This is about the soul of this company. If we allow corruption to rule, if we allow incompetence to masquerade as leadership, Helios will rot from the inside. We don't just fight for ourselves. We fight for the people who believe in this company, for the clients who trust us, for the legacy we leave behind." The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking deep. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. Determination flickered in weary eyes. For the first time in months, hope stirred. Alexander closed the folder with a decisive snap. "The board will hear us, and when they do, there will be no turning back." Vanessa Cole thought herself untouchable. Damian Ross urged her to strike back. The CEO still clung to his illusions. But the storm was no longer coming. It was already here. The fall of a tyrant never comes quietly. It begins with whispers, crescendos into rumors, and finally erupts into undeniable truth. For Vanessa Cole, the eruption came on a Tuesday morning, when the walls of Helios could no longer contain her secrets. The evidence had been building for weeks in Alexander Grant's hands. Files, testimonies, financial records. But what transformed suspicion into certainty was a photograph. Grainy but clear enough, it showed Vanessa in the dim light of a downtown bar, pressed against the chest of a man who was not the CEO. His arm was around her waist, his lips close to her ear, his grin unmistakable. Damian Ross. Attached to the photograph were bank transfers, funds quietly rerouted from Helios accounts into shell companies, then withdrawn in cash. The recipient on every trail, Ross. It was no longer just incompetence. It was betrayal. The leak began quietly. An anonymous email circulated among middle managers, containing the photo and financial records. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. First whispered in corridors, then openly passed around on phones, screens lighting up with disbelief and fury. By noon, the entire building knew. Vanessa Cole, the CEO's golden protégé, the so-called rising star, had not only failed them, she had exploited them, drained the company to fund her secret lover's life of indulgence. The hallways buzzed with electric outrage. Employees who once cowered under her heel now lifted their heads with grim satisfaction. Some laughed bitterly, others shook their heads in disgust, but all of them knew. The mask had shattered. Vanessa, unaware at first, strutted into the office as usual, her crimson dress slicing through the sea of glares. But instead of bowed heads, she met stares, hard, unflinching, condemning. Conversations died when she passed. Phones slid into pockets. The silence was deafening. Her smile faltered. The CEO summoned an emergency meeting with the senior board. Vanessa entered at his side, still clinging to confidence, though her eyes darted nervously. Alexander was already there, dossier in hand, his allies seated firmly beside him. The boardroom was tense, the city skyline gleaming behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. The CEO began with his usual bravado. "There have been rumors circulating about Vanessa Cole, baseless slander designed to undermine our leadership. I will not tolerate it." Alexander's voice cut through the room like steel. "It isn't slander, it's fact." He placed the folder on the table and slid it forward. One by one, board members opened it, their eyes widening as they scanned the contents. Photographs, emails, transfers, testimonies. Each page was a nail in Vanessa's coffin. "Impossible," the CEO muttered, his voice shaking. He turned to Vanessa, searching her face for denial, for reassurance. But Vanessa's lips trembled, her carefully painted mask cracking. "They're twisting things," she stammered. "It's not what it looks like." A board member slammed the folder shut. "It looks exactly like what it is. Fraud, misconduct, exploitation." The room erupted. Questions, accusations, voices rising in fury. The CEO tried to defend her, his words desperate, but the evidence was too strong. Every denial collapsed beneath the weight of truth. Vanessa's eyes flicked wildly from face to face, searching for an ally, for someone to shield her. But there were none. Even the CEO's voice faltered as the board turned on him. Outside the boardroom, employees gathered, waiting. When the doors finally opened, the sight was unforgettable. Vanessa Cole, pale and trembling, escorted out by security. The woman who had strutted through Helios with arrogance now stumbled, her eyes red, her lips pressed tight to hold back tears. Phones rose, pictures snapped. No one offered sympathy. She had earned every ounce of their contempt. Damian Ross, the man she had risked everything for, was nowhere to be seen. By evening, reports confirmed he had vanished. Accounts emptied, phone disconnected, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. The CEO remained inside, trapped in heated debate with the board. His reputation, once ironclad, was now in ruins. He had shielded a fraud, blinded by desire, and Helios would never forget it. Alexander watched from the balcony above as Vanessa was led away. He felt no triumph, only cold resolution. This was justice, but justice always came with scars. The company had bled for months under her reign. Clients had lost faith. Employees had been broken. But now the truth was out. And truth, once spoken aloud, could never be silenced again. That night, Alexander sat in his office, the city glowing like fire beyond the glass. The dossier lay closed on his desk, its purpose fulfilled. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across his jaw. Vanessa Cole was finished. Damian Ross had vanished. The CEO stood exposed. And Helios, though bruised, though scarred, had a chance to heal. But Alexander knew this was only the beginning. The storm had broken, yes, but storms leave wreckage. There would be fallout, there would be battles still to fight. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. The war was not yet won. But the enemy's mask had been torn away, and that was enough for now. The boardroom of Helios had never been so silent. The long glass table stretched like a battlefield, its polished surface littered with folders, photographs, and financial statements. The wreckage of Vanessa Cole's deception. At the head sat the CEO, his shoulders stiff, his face drawn tight with exhaustion and defiance. Beside him, the chair Vanessa had once occupied was empty, a symbol of everything lost. The directors shifted in their seats, eyes cold, expressions carved in stone. They had seen the evidence, seen enough to scorch every illusion the CEO had clung to. And now they wanted answers. Alexander Grant sat near the center, not at the head but commanding the room all the same. His dossier had done its work. He had no need to raise his voice. The truth sat in front of them, undeniable. Let's call this what it is. One director began, slamming a file shut. Fraud, gross misconduct, abuse of position, and it happened under your watch. His eyes drilled into the CEO. The CEO's jaw tightened. Vanessa acted alone. Her personal choices were paid for with company money. Another cut in sharply. Money siphoned out of our accounts. Money you signed off on without question. The CEO's face flushed. I trusted her. A bitter laugh rippled down the table. That's exactly the problem. The accusations came fast, like arrows loosed in succession. Negligence, favoritism, erosion of company morale. Each word drove deeper into the CEO's armor. He tried to parry, to defend, but every response collapsed under the weight of documented truth. Finally, the chairman of the board turned to Alexander. Mr. Grant, you've been silent, but your evidence brought us here. Speak. Alexander leaned forward, his hands folded, his voice calm and unyielding. This is not about one woman's ambition, he said. It is about a culture we allowed to take root, a culture where desire outweighed discipline, where arrogance was rewarded and competence ignored. Vanessa Cole is gone, but the damage remains. Clients doubt us. Employees no longer trust leadership. Investors are watching. If we do not act decisively, Helios will collapse under its own rot. The room listened, silent, every word striking with the weight of inevitability. The board must show strength, Alexander continued. Not for me, not even for the employees, for the company itself. If Helios is to survive, we cannot simply remove Vanessa. We must confront why she thrived here in the first place. The chairman nodded slowly. And what do you propose? Alexander's eyes flicked toward the CEO, his voice sharp as a blade. Accountability, from the top down. The CEO surged to his feet, anger flaring. This is mutiny. You think you can strip me of authority, undermine decades of leadership because of one mistake? Alexander rose as well, his gaze steady, unflinching. It wasn't one mistake. It was a choice. Again and again, you chose her over this company. You chose desire over duty. And now we pay the price. The board erupted in murmurs, directors leaning toward one another, their faces grim. For years, the CEO had ruled like a monarch, but now his throne shook. You want me gone? He spat at Alexander. Alexander's reply was cold, deliberate. I want Helios to live. Whether you are part of that future depends on what you do next. The chairman called for order, his gavel striking the table. Enough. We will vote. The motion was clear. Vanessa Cole was terminated permanently, barred from any future engagement with the company. No one opposed. But then came the harder question, the CEO. Whispers filled the room. Some argued for resignation, others for censure. Investors had already begun circling, demanding stability. To protect the company, someone had to be sacrificed. The CEO's face paled as the votes were tallied. When the results came in, the verdict was brutal. He would remain in position only temporarily, stripped of unilateral power, his decisions subject to immediate oversight by the board and shareholders. In effect, he was neutered, a figurehead clinging to a hollow crown. Alexander did not smile. He had not come for victory. He had come for justice. When the meeting adjourned, the CEO slumped in his chair, defeated. As the directors filed out, Alexander paused at the door. For a moment, their eyes met. One man broken by weakness, the other steeled by resolve. You had a choice, Alexander said quietly. You chose wrong. He left without another word. News of the decision spread quickly. Employees, once demoralized, lifted their heads again. Whispers turned into cautious relief. Vanessa was gone. The CEO was weakened. And in the vacuum of leadership, one name carried weight above all others. Alexander Grant. He had not asked for it. He had not sought it. But when employees looked for someone to trust, their eyes found him. That night, Alexander stood in his office, gazing out at the city lights. Helios had survived the storm, but the wreckage was everywhere. Clients had to be reassured. Employees had to be rebuilt. Trust had to be earned again. He exhaled slowly, his reflection hard in the glass. Justice had been served, but battles still remained. Vanessa Cole was gone. The CEO was diminished. But the war for Helios's soul was not yet finished. And Alexander Grant was ready to fight it to the end. The storm had broken, but the echoes lingered. In the days that followed the board's decision, Helios was a company trying to remember how to breathe. The halls that once trembled with Vanessa Cole's commands now stood quiet, the sound of her heels replaced by cautious whispers of relief. Employees moved with a new energy, tentative but real, as though a shadow had finally lifted. Vanessa, however, was nowhere to be found. She had been escorted out of the building with nothing but the handbag on her arm and the humiliation burning in her cheeks. Reporters had swarmed the entrance, cameras flashing as she stumbled past, her head bowed to hide the tears streaking her face. For weeks she had strutted like a queen. Now she looked like an exile. At first, she clung to the hope that Damien would save her. That night, she called him again and again, desperate, her voice cracking as she left message after message. Damien, answer me. We can fix this. I'll explain everything. But Damien Ross did not answer. By morning, his apartment was empty. His accounts were drained. His number disconnected. He had vanished into the night, pockets full of the money she had stolen for him. He had used her as she had used the CEO, and now he was gone. Alone, discarded, and despised, Vanessa Cole finally understood what Alexander Grant had known all along. Power built on deceit never lasts. Inside Helios, the CEO clung to his hollow title. Though the board had spared him outright dismissal, his power was a ghost of what it once was. Every decision was scrutinized, every action questioned. The man who once ruled the company like a monarch now shuffled through meetings like a penitent, stripped of authority. He saw the way employees looked at him, no longer with respect, but with pity or contempt. His downfall had not been complete, but it was merciless. And in the void left behind, a new center of gravity emerged. Alexander Grant did not seize power. He did not campaign or demand, but his presence filled the vacuum. Managers turned to him for guidance. Analysts sought his approval. Even directors leaned toward him in meetings, trusting his judgment over the CEO's weary excuses. He had become, without title or crown, the company's true leader. One afternoon, weeks after Vanessa's exile, Alexander walked the 22nd floor. The same employees who had once whispered their despair now greeted him openly. Smiles returned to faces that had been hollowed by fear. Conversations buzzed again with ideas, not complaints. The air felt alive, hopeful. A young analyst, one of those Vanessa had humiliated, approached nervously. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to thank you for standing up for us, for ending it." Alexander studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Do your work well. That will be thanks enough." It was not grandeur. It was not glory. It was truth. Vanessa's name faded from the company walls like a stain scrubbed clean. Her rise and fall became a cautionary tale whispered to new hires. Beware of arrogance. Beware of shortcuts. Beware of mistaking beauty for competence. But Alexander knew the story was not just hers. It was the CEO's failure, Damien's greed, the board's blindness, and the employees' silence. Corruption does not thrive because of one person. It thrives because too many look away. He would not look away again. That evening, as the city stretched beneath the glass tower, Alexander stood in his office, hands clasped behind his back. The skyline glowed, a river of lights flowing into the horizon. Helios had survived. Barely. The scars would remain. Trust had to be rebuilt, clients reassured, systems repaired. But survival was enough. From survival came strength. He thought of Vanessa, somewhere out there in the city, abandoned and forgotten. He thought of Damien, running with stolen money that would one day catch up to him. He thought of the CEO, a man once feared, now reduced to a shadow of himself. And then he thought of the employees, those who had endured, who had fought, who had looked to him when no one else dared to speak. For them, he would keep fighting. Alexander Grant was not a man of theatrics. He was not a man of speeches or glory. He was a man of integrity. And in the world of glass towers and fragile empires, integrity was rarer than gold. As the city lights flickered like stars, he whispered the vow that had carried him through every storm. Justice is never swift, but it always comes. And in Helios Corporation, justice had found its mark.